Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, March 4th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 180 days. The game against Michigan in 271 days. The start of spring practice in 1 day. The first interviews of spring practice actually happening today. We'll be over at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center talking to some of the Buckeyes, previewing spring football and much more. It's going to be a very busy, very entertaining week this week. So make sure you are at BuckeyeHuddle.com for all of that and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. So, all right, spring football. It's a very interesting, very exciting time of year. You can learn a lot, but you can also get misled at times as well by what you're seeing. So I'm bringing in Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. He and I have covered a whole bunch of spring football seasons over the years. So we're going to share a little bit about what you can learn, what you maybe don't want to read too much into, how many times you have to see something before it's like, okay, this is actually real, all that kind of stuff. So Tony, I guess let's start with day one. On Tuesday, we walk into the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, whether they're inside or outside, and what are we looking for on day one?
Day one, I am looking for, first off, any position moves. And the difficult part about that is you also have jersey changes. So sometimes there's some, all right, who is number 6 now? Who is number 3 now? Why is there a number, I don't remember, 34 over here. So you're trying to just get a lay of the land. And then they'll get into some stretching and you're trying to see who is stretching first, or who is like in the lead of because generally the leaders of the team will be in front jogging and things like that. So you kind of get just an assessment of that. Like, okay, I did not expect Kenyatta Jackson to be among the first group leading a line of people. That's interesting. Then it gets into position groups and the drills, and you're like, okay, who's repping first in those drills is really where you get your first opportunity to get some sort of a depth chart. And it's not the best way to do it, but it's what we have at the outset. And until we start seeing them in 11 on 11 and 7 on 7, or, offensive line against defensive line, until you really start seeing that, it's kind of like, okay, so the receivers repped in this order, the running backs repped in this order, the quarterbacks repped in this order. And then, Tom, the first drill, it was Devin Brown repping first. The second drill, it was Will Howard repping first. And then the third drill, it's Lincoln Keenol's repping first. So you got to then also assess how often did somebody rep first? Because what we saw, did we see CJ Stroud and Jack Miller kind of go back and forth for a while in terms of who was repping first? Justin Fields, I don't ever really remember Matthew Baldwin or anybody repping first ahead of him. But we know Kyle McCord and Devin Brown have done this back and forth. And so you just try to get some idea of where the pieces lined up by who's going first, because somebody had to tell them what order to be in. And it's not just a willy-nilly order for the most part.
And I think one of the big things about day one is there are no firm conclusions to draw on day one. Because guy is with a new position group. Great. How many times have we seen, hey, this guy, whatever, this center or this former tackle is repping at center on day one of spring practice? Like, whoa, this is crazy. This is wild. What do you think it means? And then day 2, he's back at tackle and you never see him at center again. Or, the corner has moved to safety, or the safety has moved to corner, and like, oh, wow, what do we think this means about the depth chart? And the answer is nothing, because he's going to be back in the old spot on Thursday. They just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and sort of see what sticks. But I think the most important thing about day one is that's not a data set. That is a data point. You have one piece of information. The most important thing that day one does is gives you something to compare it to on Thursday, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, to know, hey, here's how things have changed. Here's where someone has maybe moved from a different spot, and you can sort of start to learn something from that.
Yeah, that's why I think we all write down the order people are repping in, so that you can go back and compare it 2 days, 2 weeks. Oh, so this guy has moved up 4 spots. And then we'll see more in the 7 on 7 and 11 on 11s and see, well, this guy has moved up from third team to he's getting some reps in the first team. One of the difficult parts about the first day or the first couple of days is there's a lot going on and you're trying to take it all in, and you may miss something that somebody else sees, and somebody else will report, like, say, saw Josh Fryer at left tackle, and I'll be like, boy, I missed that one. And so then the question is like, what about Josh Fryer at left tackle? Or, you report something that you see that somebody else didn't. And there's just, like you said, it's a temporary thing. They're just looking at stuff, trying to figure out what goes best. So you can't read too much into it, but you jot it down in case that becomes clearer down the road. Like, okay, now remember, we saw earlier Josh Fryer over here up and doing this. So if something else happens over here, they can do this because they're comfortable doing it. They've done it before. It's a lot of information. It doesn't always lead to anything solid, but that's why they're trying to find what is the most solid things we have on this football team. We got to figure out what everybody else can do. And then we're all privy to some of this. And it's kind of like when a stand-up comic is putting out some new material. They're going on the road doing new material, and they're like confiscating cell phones because they don't want the bad material out there for the public. They don't want to see it on YouTube. A lot of this is just trying new material, new jokes, and it takes some time to work it all out. And sometimes it's just not that funny on day one or day two, Tom.
Yeah, and it'll look pretty rough and ragged at times on day one and day two. I mean, you have heard Ryan Day talk about guys who are just still trying to figure out like where the meeting rooms are and how to practice. And these practices are, one of the reasons that someone might see something and other people might not is there's a lot to watch. This is not just they're lining up and running football plays and we're all watching the same thing. The quarterbacks are in one part of the field, running backs are in a different part of the field, the wide receivers are maybe doing something else, the offensive line is in a different corner, the safeties are in one spot, sometimes the corners and the safeties are working together, other times not. The linebackers are somewhere, the defensive line is in another spot. And if I'm watching the defensive line, the offensive line's way on the other side of the field, so I've got no idea what's going on there. And even when we've got 3 people there to watch practice, there's always something you're not watching that someone is not watching at some time. So you can have different people seeing different things at different times. So, just because one person says something and someone else doesn't necessarily mean that one of them is wrong. It just may be someone is looking at something else. So that's a lot of the stuff you can't learn from. There are some things you can learn from day one, because there is always, it seems like, Tony, a freshman who is like the holy crap freshman of the year. And I mean, you mentioned Justin Fields earlier. He was obviously not a true freshman, but he was new to Ohio State. And I just remember the first practice we got to watch him, every quarterback who was throwing 30-yard outs or whatever it was, the ball was arcing above a certain line on the wall, and Justin Fields' ball was staying underneath there. And you could see the arm strength from all the way across the field, and it was like, wow. I go back to Garrett Wilson and watching Garrett Wilson coming out of breaks during a little 5-yard hitch kind of thing. And just, he turns, he catches, and boom, he accelerates. It was like, holy crap, this guy is really explosive. I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba, I know we've talked about, but you can sometimes also have that first impression that's like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, I've seen the recruiting rankings, now I get it.
Yeah, and there are positions that lend themselves to that more than others. Like, it's hard to see that at running back and linebacker because they're not necessarily doing a lot of between the tackle stuff. And so a lot of it's passing game, short passing game, and situational. So, like, I don't always expect to be blown away by a linebacker or a running back because it's not even thud at that point. There's just almost no contact. So it's hard to judge a running back when there's no tackling, but there are still guys, corners can stand out. Safeties covering a ton of ground can stand out. And then you'll get to see some one-on-ones with the defensive line and offensive line where you can just tell guys, you look at guys like, that dude is quick. I remember watching Isaiah Prince, and it's like, that dude is very mobile for an offensive lineman. And we've seen defensive linemen the same thing, where it's like, that guy is unnatural, basically, at how quick he is, how fast he is. And then you see some guys like Cade McDonald, not specifically, but like that are big, and they've got a quick first, like Robert Landers. Like, how is this guy moving that quickly? And you get to see that early on in spring. And again, that's just some things that just stick with you. But then there are the things that just never leave you. And you've mentioned a few of them: Justin Fields, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, where you knew that those guys were legitimately going to change things at Ohio State and do some special things. So I think it's always interesting to see in the anticipation of, will we see that? And that's always fun, whether it's in the day 2 of spring or day 10, whenever we get a full opportunity to watch these guys, because there is enough talent on hand at Ohio State in any given recruiting class where you could see that. And this is one of those recruiting classes.
And you also have to be careful not to draw too many conclusions from one play or one thing. The thing that always jumps out to me was, this wasn't even something we were there for. This is something that Ohio State put out on one of those little sizzle reels from camp, and it was just one rep. And it was Alex Williams, who was a defensive end, going up against Nick Petit-Frere, who is an offensive tackle. And Alex Williams, I mean, like, I think Nick Petit-Frere might have done a backward somersault. That's how badly he got beat on this one rep. And just to let you know where those two gentlemen are now, they both actually ended up playing football in Nashville, Tennessee. Alex Williams had 16 total tackles after transferring to Vanderbilt, and Nick Petit-Frere started 16 games for the Tennessee Titans as a rookie in 2022. So one play does not necessarily mean anything. A whole, several plays does not necessarily guarantee greatness, or that this guy's a bust because he had one bad play or 3 bad plays. It's all just individual little things we can learn a little bit from. We will start learning all of that stuff on Tuesday. We'll learn a little more on Monday before we even get in there for Tuesday with those interviews. Start learning on Tuesday. We'll start telling you what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're learning, and we'll do that all the way through spring ball, all the way through to the spring game on April 13th. And we'll be doing that all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where Tony, Kevin, and I cover the team. Mark covers recruiting. We've got our whole team of X's and O's gurus making you smarter football fans. Also, the Huddle Board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse. That's where we interact with all of you, answer your questions, talk football, share videos, share photos, all that good stuff. All you got to do is sign up at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Give it a try for a month. This would be a great month to do it. There's going to be a lot of stuff for us to talk about there. Recruiting season heading into kicking into high gear, as well as you have visits during the course of the spring. Several potentially big name targets possibly on commitment watch soon. There is a lot to talk about. We're talking about it all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.